The copper taste of blood was the only thing that felt real. It pooled under my tongue, warm and metallic, before a thick drop escaped my lip and hit the white linoleum floor. I watched it. A small, crimson stain on the sterile perfection of a Seattle gynecologist's waiting room. My stepbrother, Tyler Henderson, stood over me. His shadow was a dark weight pressing down on my chest. His fist was still clenched, white-knuckled and trembling with a rage that I hadn't earned. In his other hand, he waved a stack of legal papers like a flag of conquest. "Choose how you pay or get out," he screamed. His voice bounced off the walls, sharp and jagged. Around us, other patients scrambled away. I heard the frantic scrape of chairs and the muffled gasps of horror. They saw a monster attacking a woman who could barely stand. Tyler didn't see people. He only saw obstacles. "Sign these now, or I will make sure you never set foot in our father's house again," he snarled. Each word was a threat to my existence. I tried to push myself up. The stitches from my emergency surgery, just 3 days old, felt like they were red-hot wires tearing through my skin. The physical pain was intense, but the indignation was cold. It was a freezing, clinical clarity. The nurse was already on the phone, her voice trembling as she called 911. Her hands were shaking as badly as mine, but for a different reason. She was terrified. I was just calculating the cost. "My name is Olivia Henderson. I am 34 years old. 2 weeks ago, I had a future. I had a baby on the way, a father who loved me, and a place I called home. Now, I was bleeding on a medical office floor while my stepbrother tried to steal a $25 million logistics empire. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Like you were just a line item on someone else's balance sheet? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a message and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community and who is standing with me in this moment." Tyler didn't wait for an answer. He looked at me with pure contempt. "You think you are too good for this?" He sneered. "You think you are still the favorite? Dad is gone, Olivia. The bank is closed." I didn't cry. I didn't beg for mercy. Mercy was a currency Tyler didn't trade in. I just wiped the blood from my chin with the back of my hand and looked him in the eye. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't a breakdown. It was a declaration of war. Tyler turned on his heel and stormed out before the sirens got too close. He left me there, broken on the floor, thinking he had won. He thought he had closed the deal. He didn't realize that he had just handed me the one thing I needed to destroy him. Absolute, unemotional clarity. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. It was a balance sheet that needed to be settled. I looked at the blood on the floor one last time. This wasn't a tragedy. This was accounting. As the paramedics wheeled me out, my hand was already reaching for my phone. Tyler thought he had taken everything. He forgot that I was the one who built the system he was trying to steal. He forgot that in a world of physical strength, digital power is the ultimate predator. I leaned my head back against the thin pillow of the stretcher. The cool Seattle air hit my face as we transitioned to the ambulance. Inside my mind, a different kind of sunrise was glowing. It was the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet, lethal retribution. The clock was ticking. Tyler had his moment of violence. Now, it was time for my moment of logic. I closed my eyes and began to visualize the code. I began to visualize the fleet. In 12 minutes, Tyler Henderson would realize that you can't punch a computer system. And you certainly can't bully a woman who has nothing left to lose but her dignity. The game had changed. The subscription to his version of family had just been cancelled. And I was the one holding the scissors. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren began its rhythmic, morning wail. But inside my head, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic clicking of a virtual keyboard. I didn't feel the bumps in the road or the pressure of the blood pressure cuff on my arm. I felt the architecture of Vanguard Global. I had been the silent investor in Tyler's version of reality for too long. I had been the one footing the bill for his mistakes, his gambling, and his incompetence. Our father, Gregory, had built the foundation, but I was the one who built the skyscraper. I was the chief strategy officer, the one who wrote the algorithms that kept our ships moving across the globe. Tyler thought a title made him powerful. He thought having Henderson as a last name gave him the right to my life's work. He didn't understand that power isn't a birthright. It is a series of permissions. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my coat. The screen glowed, reflecting in my eyes. I didn't check my messages. I didn't look at the missed calls from my stepmother, Stephanie. I went straight to the administrative backend of the Vanguard Global Logistics Net. My father had given me the master key access codes years ago. He trusted me because I was the only one who understood that logistics isn't about trucks and ships. It is about data. It is about control. Tyler was probably sitting in his car right now, feeling like a king. He was probably calling Stephanie to tell her that the Olivia problem was handled. He was probably imagining how he would spend the first few million of the company's liquid assets. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret, but there was only clarity. My compassion had been a luxury the Hendersons had overdrafted for years. The account was now empty. At 11:51 p.m., the night before, Tyler had sent me a text saying I was no longer part of the family. He had officially severed the contract. Fine. If I wasn't a Henderson, then I wasn't the person responsible for keeping his fleet afloat. I bypassed the biometrics and entered the command center. I watched the map of the world bloom on my screen. Hundreds of blue icons represented the Vanguard global fleet. They were moving across the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian Oceans. Each icon represented millions of dollars in cargo, fuel, and contracts. I didn't hesitate. My thumb hovered over the GPS master lock protocol. This was a failsafe I had designed for a cyber attack or a high-seas hijacking. It was designed to freeze the fleet in place to prevent theft. It was clinical. It was factual. I hit execute. The blue icons on the screen began to pulse red. One by one, the ship's navigation systems were being remotely encrypted and locked. The engines wouldn't shut down, but the computers would refuse to provide coordinates. The crews would be blind. The automated docking systems would reject all commands. Vanguard Global was officially offline. I watched the red lights spread across the digital map. It was a beautiful, crimson wave of consequences. In less than 60 seconds, the empire Tyler tried to steal had become a collection of very expensive, very stationary paperweights. By 12:03 a.m., the retaliation was complete. The logistics of a $25 million company were now as useless as the papers Tyler had shoved in my face. The paramedic asked me if I was feeling dizzy. I looked at him and smiled. It was the first time I had smiled since the surgery. I feel better than I have in years, I said. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a grieving daughter or a woman who had lost her child. I was a strategist who had just reclaimed her territory. Tyler and Stephanie weren't shocked by what they had done to me. They were about to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. My phone began to vibrate. It was Tyler. I didn't answer. Then it was the office of the Port Authority. I didn't answer that either. I watched the notifications pile up like a mountain of unpaid debt. Let them panic. Let them realize that the invisible daughter was the only thing holding their world together. Tyler Henderson wanted me to choose how I pay. Well, I chose. I paid with the only thing they ever valued. Their money. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a balance sheet. And for the first time in my life, the numbers were finally starting to make sense. The ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance of the hospital. As the doors opened, I saw Dr. Ethan Brooks waiting for me. He looked concerned, professional, and solid. I didn't need a savior, but I knew I was going to need an ally. I tucked my phone away. The red lights on the screen were still pulsing. Each one was a reminder that the war had only just begun. Tyler thought he could beat me into submission. He was about to learn that you can't fight an enemy you can't see, especially when that enemy is the very air your business breathes. Calm. Factual. Lethal. That was my new brand. And as they wheeled me into the bright lights of the hospital, I knew one thing for certain. The Hendersons were about to learn exactly how much it costs to cross Olivia Henderson. Vanguard Global wasn't just a company to me. It was my heartbeat. I spent 5 years as the chief strategy officer, building the infrastructure that made us the king of logistics in Seattle. I was the one who wrote the routing algorithms that shaved 10% off our fuel costs. I was the one who secured the $10 million contract with the tech giants in Redmond. While I was building an empire, Tyler was busy tearing holes in the floorboards. I remember the day I found the first discrepancy. I was running a deep audit of our internal accounts when I stumbled upon a shadow ledger. Tyler had been bleeding the employee pension fund dry for years. He hadn't just taken a few thousand, he had embezzled $1,500,000 to fuel his high-stakes gambling debts in Vegas and his obsession with luxury cars. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just told me to fix it because I was the smart one. And I did fix it. Like an idiot, I used $1,500,000 of my own performance bonuses and private investments to plug that hole before the federal regulators noticed. I did it to protect our father's legacy and the retirement of 300 honest employees who had worked for us since the beginning. I thought my loyalty would buy me a seat at the table. I didn't realize I was just paying for the privilege of being their most valuable servant. I looked at the mahogany desk in the corner of my mind, the one Tyler now occupies. Sitting right there, next to his expensive scotch, is my mother's antique gold compass. It was the only thing I had left of her, a beautiful relic from the 19th century that she gave me before she died. Tyler doesn't value its history or its precision. He uses it as an ashtray, stubbing out his cigarettes against the delicate glass face that once guided my mother's family across the Atlantic. That sight is the perfect metaphor for our family dynamic. I provide the direction, and Tyler provides the ash. This is what I call the trap of cruelty normalization. Stephanie and Tyler haven't just been mean to me, they've spent years convincing themselves that exploiting me is a standard business practice. In their heads, I'm not a sister or a daughter, I'm a piece of high-performance equipment that doesn't require maintenance or kindness. They've normalized my suffering to the point where it doesn't even register as a moral choice anymore. To Stephanie, me losing my baby and my father in the same month isn't a tragedy, it's just a convenient window of vulnerability to initiate a hostile takeover. But they miscalculated. They thought that because I was the one who always fixed things, I would never be the one to break them. They forgot that the person who built the system knows exactly where the self-destruct button is hidden. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdraft for years, and today, I finally closed the account. The silence after I locked the fleet lasted exactly 120 minutes. I sat in the dim light of the hospital observation room, watching the red pulses on my phone screen, waiting for the counter-move. Stephanie didn't just attack my career, she weaponized my grief. The internal memo sent to the Vanguard Global Board of Directors was a surgical strike of character assassination. She had attached a forged medical evaluation from a psychiatrist I had never even met. It claimed I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and clinical instability following my miscarriage. It suggested that my decision to lock the fleet was the act of a broken woman who had lost her grip on reality. By the time I could stand up to protest, the narrative was already set. I was no longer the chief strategy officer, I was a liability. The eviction was just as clinical. They didn't even give me time to pack. By the time I arrived at my company-owned apartment in the Belltown district, 2 private security guards were already stationed at the door. They were holding an emergency order that Tyler had secured, declaring me a danger to myself and the company property. My key card didn't work. The locks had been changed while I was still being monitored by Dr. Brooks. I watched from the sidewalk as a crew of movers began purging my life. They weren't moving me out, they were discarding me. The Seattle rain started as a light mist and quickly turned into a relentless downpour. My belongings were being shoved out of the lobby and onto the wet pavement of the sidewalk. My professional awards, my designer suits, my books, everything was piled into a heap on the grass near the street. The stitches in my abdomen felt like they were being tugged by 1,000 tiny hooks with every breath I took. The physical pain was a dull roar, but the indignity was a sharp, cold blade. I knelt on the wet pavement, ignoring the stares of the neighbors and the passers-by. I wasn't looking for my laptop or my jewelry. I was looking for the small, glossy black and white images I had kept in a silver frame on my nightstand. My baby's ultrasound photos. I found one, half buried in the mud near a drainage grate. The edges were already beginning to curl and blur from the water. I wiped the grit from the tiny, pixelated image of a life that never got to start. That was the moment the last shred of familial hesitation died. Stephanie and Tyler thought this would break me. They thought that by labeling me unstable and throwing me into the street, I would crawl back and sign whatever papers they put in front of me. They believed that a woman in mourning is a woman without a spine. They had spent years normalizing their cruelty, convincing themselves that I was just a tool to be used and then discarded when I became inconvenient. But they forgot that I am a master of logistics. I know how to manage a crisis, and I know how to navigate through the dark. I looked up at the glowing glass towers of the city, my hair plastered to my face by the rain, and I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a ghost. And ghosts are very hard to kill because they have nothing left to lose. The pain wasn't a distraction anymore, it was fuel. This wasn't a tragedy. This was a necessary clearance. Stephanie had just cleared the board for me. Now, it was my turn to move. I didn't go to a hotel. I went to the only person in Seattle who still knew how to count the cost of a lie. Teresa Walsh was 65 and had been the chief auditor at Vanguard Global for 15 years. She was a human scalpel, and she had been my father's most trusted guardian of the numbers. At 2 a.m, we weren't looking at spreadsheets. We were dressed in black, creeping across the damp grass of the Henderson estate. "I can't believe I am breaking and entering at my age," Teresa whispered as she held the flashlight. "Technically," I told her, "this house is still in probate, so I am just visiting a property I partially own." We found the basement window, the one Dad always promised to fix but never did. I jimmied it open just like I used to when I was 16, and we slipped into the shadows. The basement smelled like him. Old Spice and the scent of fresh-cut cedar from his woodworking bench. Behind the water heater, hidden by a false panel that looked like generic insulation, was a small, heavy safe. My mother's birthday opened no on the first try. Inside were 3 items that shifted the world on its axis: the Real will, a folder of evidence documenting Tyler's $1,500,000 embezzlement, and a letter in my father's shaky, uneven handwriting. "My dear Olivia," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then my suspicions were correct. I have been feeling worse since Stephanie and Tyler began managing my medications. Each pill felt like a lead weight in my chest. I knew they were hurrying me along. I saw the greed in their eyes every time I coughed. I am sorry I couldn't tell you. Tyler monitors the house lines, and Stephanie checks my phone while I sleep. Trust Teresa. Trust the truth. Do not let them win. All my love, Dad." This was the silent regret of a man who stood guard until his last breath. My father knew he was being poisoned. He spent his final weeks trapped in his own home, watching his wife and stepson plan his funeral. He didn't just endure the pain, he used it. He turned his own decline into a trap. Teresa gasped as she pulled a small, unlabeled vial from the back of the safe. "This isn't poison, Olivia," she said, her voice trembling. My father's note explained it. He had secretly replaced the high doses of medicine they were giving him with a specific biomarker chemical he'd obtained from a lab contact. It was a tracer. It was designed to bind to organ tissue and glow bright green under ultraviolet light. If they had just let him die naturally, the tracer would have remained a secret. But by administering unauthorized substances, they had forced the chemical to react. It was a digital signature inside a human body. My father hadn't just died, he had turned his own remains into a crime scene that could be read like a map. We dug deeper into the second folder. It contained newspaper clippings, some yellowed with age. Stephanie's first husband had died of a heart attack at 48. Her second died of kidney failure within 2 years. Her third husband had a stroke 18 months after the wedding. All of them left her everything. My father was husband number 4. Gregory Henderson had been her retirement plan. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. This was the work of a professional predator. A black widow who had finally met a victim smart enough to mark her before he fell. I closed the safe and stood up in the dark. The physical pain from my surgery was still there, but it was nothing compared to the cold, lethal precision growing in my mind. Tyler thought he was a player. Stephanie thought she was a ghost. They didn't realize that under the right light, everything they had done was about to glow. Teresa held the small vial up to the dim light of the basement, her eyes narrowing behind her spectacles. She didn't look like an old lady in the dark, she looked like a judge delivering a verdict. "This is not a pharmaceutical, Olivia," she whispered. "This is a marking agent. A synthetic tracer. Your father didn't just suspect they were killing him, he invested in the proof. He had been drinking this tracer, allowing it to saturate his system. If he had died of natural causes, this chemical would have remained inert. But the high doses of unauthorized medication Stephanie was forcing into his system acted as a catalyst. Under a specific frequency of ultraviolet light, his internal organs would literally testify against them. His body was a ledger they couldn't shred. I sat on the cold floor, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. This wasn't just a corporate takeover, it was a serial execution. I opened the second folder, the one containing the newspaper clippings. Stephanie Miles. Stephanie Garrett. Stephanie Kolinsky. 3 husbands. 3 sudden, quiet deaths. 3 massive inheritances totaling nearly $5 million. My father was victim number 4, the $10 million retirement plan. Each husband had been a business transaction to her. A 3-year contract that she terminated early for a maximum payout. She didn't marry for love, she married for the exit fee. I looked at the notes my father had written in the margins of her medical research. He had documented the Tuesday dose increases. The Thursday pill switches. She had planned his death down to the hour, unaware that he was recording her every move. She thought she was the predator, but my father had turned himself into the bait. He had endured the slow, agonizing shutdown of his heart just to make sure I had the tools to finish this. He had given his life to protect the empire I built. The physical pain in my abdomen, the pull of the stitches, it all faded into a sharp, clinical focus. I didn't feel like a grieving daughter anymore, I felt like an auditor closing a terminal case. Stephanie and Tyler weren't just greedy, they were a systemic failure of humanity. And I was the correction. We photographed every document, every clipping, every line of my father's desperate, heroic evidence. We packed the bioluminescent tracer vial like it was the crown jewel of Vanguard Global. Because it was. It was the only light that mattered now. Teresa looked at me, her face hard and determined. "What is the next move?" she asked. I stood up, ignoring the protest from my ribs. "Tomorrow is the board meeting," I said. "Tyler is going to try to sell the company to our biggest competitor for $3 million. He thinks he's liquidating an asset. He doesn't realize he's opening the door to his own cell. I'm not going to sue them for the money, I'm going to bury them with the facts." Inside my mind, the map was clear. The red lights of the locked fleet were still pulsing. The red lights of my father's tracer were waiting for the switch. Everything they had done in the dark was about to be exposed to a light they couldn't escape. This wasn't revenge. This was a professional forensic reconstruction of a crime. And the audit was finally complete. The boardroom of Vanguard Global smelled like expensive cologne and the metallic scent of a dying empire. Tyler sat in my father's chair, spinning a gold fountain pen between his fingers with a smugness that made my skin crawl. Stephanie was next to him, wearing a black silk suit that probably cost more than my first car. They were smiling. It was the smile of people who think they have successfully liquidated a soul for a $3 million merger check. I didn't knock. I didn't ask for permission. I walked in, followed by Teresa and 3 men in dark suits who didn't look like they were there to discuss logistics. Tyler didn't even stand up. He just leaned back, his orange-tinted hair vibrant under the fluorescent lights. "Security is already on their way, Olivia," he sneered, looking at me like I was a piece of discarded equipment. "You're trespassing on company property. You're unstable, remember?" "Actually," I said, my voice as cold and clinical as a forensic report, "I'm auditing." I walked to the head of the table and set the bioluminescent vial we found in the basement safe right in the center of the mahogany surface. It looked like ordinary water in the bright light, but to Tyler and Stephanie, it was a ticking bomb they didn't recognize. Tyler rolled his eyes and reached for the merger documents. "We're busy, Olivia. Fitzgerald Industries is waiting. Sign the company over to them, and maybe I'll give you $50,000 instead of $20,000 just to get you out of my sight." I didn't answer him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a high-intensity ultraviolet lamp. I hit the light switch, plunging the room into a dim, heavy shadow, and then I clicked the UV lamp on. The room shifted into an eerie, purple haze. I pointed the beam at the merger documents Tyler was about to sign. The papers didn't just reflect the light. They bled a neon green glow. A vibrant, pulsing chemical signature appeared across the signature lines. Then, I moved the light. The glow was visible on Tyler's fingertips. It was splashed across the rim of Stephanie's coffee cup. It was a trail of neon guilt leading directly back to them. I watched Stephanie's face as the reality hit her. She tried to grab her phone, her movements frantic and clumsy, but her power was gone. This is what I call the power illusion of the empty wallet. Stephanie and Tyler had spent their entire lives believing that their status was an inherent part of their DNA. They thought the respect people gave them belonged to their names. They didn't realize it was just a subscription service paid for by my father's money and my strategic hard work. Now that the credit line was cut and the truth was glowing in the dark, they were just 2 frightened people in a purple room. Without the $25 million fortress to hide in, Tyler was just a bully who couldn't balance a checkbook. Stephanie was just a predator whose hunting grounds were being seized. Their authority was a costume they could no longer afford to rent, and the lease had just expired. The boardroom doors opened, but it wasn't company security. It was the authorities. Tyler tried to hide his hands behind his back, but they were glowing like beacons of a crime they thought they'd buried. "Tyler Henderson, Stephanie Henderson," a voice announced from the doorway, "you are under arrest for the embezzlement of $1,500,000, wire fraud, and the first-degree murder of Gregory Henderson." Tyler actually fainted. He hit the floor with a dull thud, his head narrowly missing the filing cabinet. Stephanie didn't flinch, she just looked at me with that cold, empty gaze and whispered that she would appeal. "She won't win." My father's body, saturated with the tracer he drank to protect me, was an irrefutable ledger. The accounting was finally settled. The dust from the legal battle finally settled, leaving behind something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Justice wasn't just about the handcuffs or the long sentences handed to Stephanie and Tyler. It was about the restoration of a soul. Vanguard Global was no longer a hunting ground for predators. I ensured the $1,500,000 were returned to the employee pension fund, with interest. I watched the faces of the people who had built this company along with my father, realizing their futures were safe again. I stood in front of my father's grave on a quiet, gray morning in Seattle. I placed the antique gold compass on the headstone, its glass now polished and clear, no longer tainted by Tyler's ash. The invisible daughter had finally found her way home. I didn't feel the need to shout or gloat. The balance sheet of my life was finally in the black. I realized then that the most powerful revenge isn't the physical destruction of your enemies. It is building a life so bright that their darkness can no longer reach you. I wasn't just a survivor anymore, I was a creator. I am no longer a victim of a story I didn't write. I am simply Olivia. As I walked back to the car, Dr. Ethan Brooks was waiting for me. He held my hand with a warmth that didn't come from a business transaction or a hidden agenda. I touched my stomach, where a new heartbeat was starting to rhythmically announce its presence. Despite everything they did to try and kill my future, hope found a way to bloom again. If this story gave you the strength to stand tall against injustice, please share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. Because sometimes, justice needs our quiet resilience to truly shine.